Soll ich dich einem Sommertag vergleichen, der du viel lieblicher und sanfter bist? Durch Maienblüten raue Winde streichen und Sommers Pracht hat allzu kurze Frist.
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of the fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growst.
Oft fühlst du heiß des Himmels Auge brennen, oft hüllt zu dunkler Schleier sein Azur, und stets muss Schönes sich vom Schönen trennen, durch Zufall oder Wandel der Natur. Doch deines Sommers Glanz wird nie ermatten, nie von dir fallen deine Herrlichkeit. Nie wirst du wandeln in des Todes Schatten, in ewigen Reimen strahlst du durch die Zeit. Solange Menschen atmen, Augen sehen, wird dies mein Lied, wirst du in ihm bestehen. Solange Menschen atmen, Augen sehen, wird dies mein Lied, wirst du in ihm bestehen. Solange Menschen atmen, Augen sehen, wird dies mein Lied, wirst du in ihm bestehen. Solange Menschen atmen, Augen sehen.
So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Do you like poetry? Do you think it's fun or old-fashioned? Some people think poetry is complicated, unintelligible, romantic gibberish. Others enjoy a good poetry slam, for example. You may even write poetry yourself. If you do write poetry, you know that there is always a trigger, some outstanding occasion, some intense emotion or deep thought which elbows its way into your conscience and subsequently into expression. You know, of course, the meaning of your own poems, but when you read somebody else's poem, you may think, well, it's beautiful, but what is he or she on about? Poetry is such lovely language. It's music made with words. But it is only when you discover where it strikes a chord within you that you really start to enjoy a good poem. You very probably heard of William Shakespeare, the playwright, but do you know his poetic side? He wrote quite a lot of poetry, 154 sonnets and other longer narrative poems. The sonnets in particular are cool, believe me. So, William Shakespeare, the poet, what's the story? First, I have to admit that we know precious few indisputable facts about Shakespeare's life, but we have lots of circumstantial evidence. It is possible to construct a story or stories about the events of his life. And it goes like this. Imagine, we are in Elizabethan London. It's 1593. London is being laid waste by the plague. It started in late 1591. After ravaging through the suburbs, the pandemic seemed at first to subside, but then, in late 1592, it came back with a vengeance and ruled London for another year. In September 1593, it kills 1,000 Londoners per week. Each period of plague in London took about a quarter of the population. London in those days held approximately 200,000 inhabitants, with up to 4,000 dead a month. That is pretty scary. The theatres are closed by royal decree. All the theatre professionals are out of work. One of them is William Shakespeare, aged 29. At that time, a member of the Lord Stranger's Men at the Rose Theatre. Right before the plague hit London, he had a very successful run with his drama series, Henry VI. His trilogy of Henry VI plays are smash hits, with Londoners flocking to see the royal true crime stories. By the way, he first wrote Part 2, then Part 3, and then the prequel, Part 1. So, you see, belated prequels to blockbusters are not an invention of the modern film industry. Anyway, with theatres closed for several months or longer, actors and playwrights are in dire straits. A few manage to go on tour through the English countryside, shunning all the towns and cities where the Black Death also dominates life. Will Shakespeare stays on in London. Maybe he carries on working on plays. He certainly doesn't go on stage. But fickle fortune, Providence, smiles on young Will Shakespeare by plucking two formidable rivals out of his path. First, the renowned playwright and novelist Robert Greene. He heartily despises Shakespeare, calls him an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, who bombast out blank verse. He refers to the simple truth that Will Shakespeare filches almost all his story plots from other writers, a habit that our Will happily keep for the rest of his career. How Greene must have hated him. He writes these lines on his deathbed. Then, on the 30th May 1593, the superstar of the day, Christopher Kit Marlowe, gets killed in a brawl which takes place at a dubious mansion situated in the Deptford Docks, southeast London. There is a party of young men, including Marlowe. There is alcohol involved and probably something else. He and a man called Ingram Fraser start a fight, during which his opponent drives a knife through Marlowe's right temple, killing him on the spot. Manslaughter? Assassination? Marlowe's death remains a mystery. There are rumours that Marlowe was a spy for the Catholics or for Sir Francis Walsingham, Secretary of State and Queen Elizabeth's spy master. I'll come to that later. And Will Shakespeare? What do you think he considered his future to be like at that moment? Well, in time he will climb the ladder up to the highest ranks of England's poets. But right now, things don't look rosy, but not just for him. Nowadays, we almost exclusively talk of Shakespeare, the Renaissance playwright, the magician of theatre. His plays are performed all over the world. There are sometimes also productions of other contemporaneous playwrights like Kit Marlowe, Ben Jonson, or John Webster. But that is just the tip of an iceberg. There was a huge competition in Shakespeare's days. There were many other more or less talented, successful, ambitious playwrights or actor playwrights jostling for public favour and aristocratic support. I'll mention a few just to give you an impression. No need to remember the names. John Lyly, Thomas Lodge, George Peele, Thomas Nash, John Marston and Thomas Kidd. Later on, Thomas Middleton, with whom Shakespeare collaborated on some plays. Then George Chapman, John Ford, Thomas Dekker, John Webster. Lots of Thomases and Johns, don't you think? Anyway, as long as the theatres were open, Actors and playwrights had their income through ticket sales. Once the theatres were closed, you had to find and please your rich, most often aristocratic patron. Will Shakespeare hits the jackpot with the Right Honourable Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton. As an outward sign of being his man, he dedicates a longish narrative poem, Venus and Adonis, to him. Who is this Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton? He is of high nobility, 19 years old, self-possessed, of almost feminine beauty, highly educated. He is reading law at Cambridge, and he is filthy rich. What a wonderful what a wonderful patron for ambitious Will Shakespeare. Where did they first meet? At the Rose Theatre, perhaps? Young law students frequent the playhouses in droves. In any case, the dedication to Southampton is a very good move by our Will. Published in 1593, Venus and Adonis quickly becomes a bestseller. It is an absolute hit with Southampton's fellow students, all of them young, rich, and mostly noble. Some of them even prattle on about tucking the booklet under their pillows. Why? Well, mainly because its deliciously erotic content is wrapped in racy verse. And it's funny in parts. Venus, the experienced goddess of love, falls in love with beautiful, young, virgin, and mortal Adonis. Her vain attempts to seduce the squeamish youngster spark quite a few comic scenes. For example, in a wild attempt to be near him, she drags him from his horse and restrains him in an armlock. He is all the more unwilling. To be thus overpowered by a woman is shameful, even if she is a mighty goddess. Venus, being so enraged, desire doth lend her force courageously to pluck him from his horse. Over one arm the lusty courser's rein, under her other was the tender boy, who blushed and pouted in a dull disdain, with leaden appetite, unapt to toy. She, red and hot as coals in glowing fire, he red for shame, but frosty in desire. The story doesn't end well. Adonis gets killed by a wild boar without having been introduced to the bliss of physical love. Conclusion: carpe diem, seize the day. Southampton may have recognized himself in Adonis because he, too, avoided women. Yet, 10 years from now, his exquisite taste for young noble ladies will get him into trouble with a queen. We'll come to that later. So, Will finds employment with his lordship. He starts to write sonnets for him, which circulate among Southampton's friends and acquaintances. Were they read aloud when the friends socialized? I don't know, but given their amazing musicality, it seems likely to me. The first sonnets praise the young lord's beauty and, this is odd, charmingly remonstrate with him for not begetting legitimate children. Handing down the name through unbroken bloodlines has always been a predominant occupation with nobility. Remember, the plague stalks through Europe, and many people die young, regardless of their social standing. It seems highly unlikely that Will would have lost sleep over Southampton's refusal to reproduce. So, scholars believe the Countess Southampton, Henry's mother, to have paid Shakespeare to write these first 17 so-called breed sonnets. Shakespeare probably alludes to her in sonnet number 10. Thou art thy mother's glass, and she in thee calls back the lovely April of her prime. The whole affair is not quite as straightforward, I have to admit. We do not know for sure whether all these sonnets were addressed to Southampton alone. Some of the sonnets 1 to 17 may just as well have been written for the House of Pembroke, where the situation is identical. Will Shakespeare did not write exclusively for one patron, and he seems to have been acquainted with young Lord Pembroke as well. His early plays are part of the repertory of the Lord Pembroke's men, with whom he also played for a short time. You see, this is a maze of relationships, but for simplicity's sake, let us assume House of Southampton. Master Shakespeare, the Countess of Southampton, may have addressed him. It will be your task to advocate love's cause with all the poetic eloquence you can muster. And he did. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Oh, sweet Mr. Shakespeare. Now, let us look at the sonnet number 18, but not in the usual way as a poetic recitation or intimate musing, but as a kind of dialogue directed towards a visible and responding partner. Oh. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair some time declines, by chance, or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of the fair thou owest, nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Sonnet number 18 is one of the best known today. It probably marks the turning point in their relationship. Its tone is much more intimate than in the previous sonnets. It has been interpreted as the first genuine declaration of love after the sonnets 1 to 17, which are dubbed breed sonnets. Some people think it might also be addressed towards an anonymous girl or woman, but let us stick with Southampton. Shakespeare and his lordship were quite close in 1593. Max, what kind of emotion does the image of a summer's day evoke?
Hope, friendship, love, lightness, warmth.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. I think that is what the poem's driving at. The poet asks whether he should compare a young man's beauty and charisma with a summer's day. But immediately afterwards he says, no. He's even more lovely, which might be a bit of a compliment, and more temperate. Now, temperate is the magic word here. In the next lines, Will gives us vivid examples of the intemperance of English summers. They can be rainy, destructively cold. The darling buds of May are shaken by rough winds. For example, the freezing Baltic winds that sweep through East Anglia. So the tender May buds fall prey to frosts. Summers are quickly over. Summer's lease hath all too short a date. Moreover, it is a lease. You do not own the summertime. There is a metaphoric dimension to that, of course. Shakespeare alludes to the summer of your life, your prime. Or summers may be parchingly dry. Sometime too hot, the eye of heaven shines. That is to say, the sun. The summer of 1593 was the hottest and driest summer of the decade. In the next lines, he refers to time mercilessly passing by, and every fair from fair sometime declines. fair, that is beauty, decays by chance, by accident, or by nature's changing course, untrimmed. Living your life will inevitably turn you from young beauty to doddery old age. The Shakespearean sonnets consist of 3 quatrains, 3 times 4 lines and 1 ending couplet. The 3rd quatrain begins with a but. He puts us on edge. Here, he gives the sonnet a real crafty spin. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. The subject's splendor will live on forever, and even death will lose his sway over him. Nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. Mighty death a braggart? In choosing this verb, Will prepares us for what is to come. When in eternal lines to time thou growest. Death is vincible through poetry. Will says, in other words, lovely boy, my verses will make you immortal. I'll give you that which everybody seeks. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Poetry gives life? At first, this smacks very much of hubris. Does Will take for granted that his poems will be read in hundreds of years' time? But let us phrase the lines a bit differently. When in eternal lines, I'll write you into eternity, to time thou growest. Through my art of writing, your name will shine even brighter with the passing of time. I'll give you perpetuance and the fame you seek. It has often been said that written words endure and their inherent knowledge persist, while monuments crumble and what they memorize will be wiped out. The sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. Dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. This is the rhythm of our heart, the rhythm we associate with being alive. Now, look at the stark symmetry within the lines, the verbs breathe, see, lives, gives in particular. I cannot help but associate the underlying meaning, I am the author of your fame. I write of you, make you known to others, to posterity. I breathe life into your image. To conclude, you need me. What cunning! Please bear with me a little longer. The sonnet starts with a question. I've heard many interpreters more or less ignoring the question mark or phrasing the line as rhetoric because they want to gallop on to the splendid, riddling answer of the second line. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. I think the question mark is there for a reason. It denotes an attitude, a gesture, as it were. The attitude of someone observing and being puzzled by what he perceives or feels at that moment. Given the private tone, I think the poet is observing the other one closely. When you speak the second line now, you can feel a vague, shall we say, insecurity? The insecurity of someone bound to the one he perceives and not knowing for sure what to expect next. The word temperate gives away what he is looking for. He wants the other person to be temperate, that is to say, marked by moderation, not given to wild tempers. He wants the other to be loyal, faithful, reliable. He is looking for emotional security in the other. Well, he hopes for it. The following lines expand on that feeling of insecurity. You never can tell what the future holds in store for you. This is expressed through the images of fickle weather, chance, and eventual decay. This rumination stops abruptly with the beginning but of the third quatrain. But thy eternal summer shall not fade. I'm overdoing it. Nor lose possession of the fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. Do you realize how he guides our associations with repeating the key word, eternal? And he binds eternal summer and eternal lines together, thus connecting eternal summer, that is lasting glory, with eternal lines, the glory of writing. You can almost feel your hands searching for the nearest pen and piece of paper. Plus, he gives us a wonderful argumentative chain with but, nor, when. Listen to the sounds the vowels make. Dark, 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 light. Read the lines aloud. You can't help smiling with the light when in eternal, after the dark, stubborn sounds of the previous two lines. When you arrive at the concluding lines, you almost want to hold up and brandish a sheet of paper. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Is the insecurity of the beginning swept away by a steadfast conclusion? No. The beginning is still present at the end. Let's return to the first line. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Compare. What kind of action is that? It may be spontaneous. I'll take the bigger cup. Or it may be the more elaborate, reflective comparison you do when writing. So, if this sonnet sings the praise of the young Southampton, it simultaneously sings the praise of Will's writing about Southampton. He offers a quid pro quo. Be faithful to me, and I'll give you what you seek. This is beautiful. As an actor, you recognize how he builds an emotional process through a chain of gestures behind the words. Will's sonnets are theatrical mini-pieces, no less. In the end, sonnet number 18 may be a love poem at first sight, but it is also a challenge to realize that writing has great social relevance, especially for ambitious aristocrats like Southampton. In combining his own art with a person of Southampton, he makes an item of both of them, not necessarily as lovers, because it is not Will the man he is talking about here, but his function as a poet. So, what kind of relationship might that have been? And why did Will stress his indispensability so much? More of that next time.